All right, we're going to get started with Module 4. Module 4 is on page 4-3. We're dealing with the lead and copper rule. And again, upon completion of this module, you'll be able to define some of the components of the lead and copper rule. And you'll understand why it's a necessity to test for lead and copper. We'll discuss the regulatory overview. We'll look at the health effects of lead and copper, as well as discuss sampling methods for lead and copper. We'll look at the action levels. And I'm pretty sure if you've done your lead and copper sampling, you probably are familiar with the action level. For lead, 0.015 milligrams per liter, copper 1.3. We're going to talk about public education. How do we educate the public, and what are the regulatory requirements when we have an exceedance of the limits? And we'll talk about various lead and copper treatment options. Now, I know many of you all probably can think of, in past, lead and copper was widely used. Why? It's cheap and widely available. And so we have lead service lines, we have copper, we have solder and flux utilizing lead material. But over time, what was developed and understood was that, hey, there's an adverse health effect associated with lead and copper. Some of those adverse health effects, I'm pretty sure that you all know, that it kind of interferes with the developmental process with our brains as far as lead is concerned. So they started seeing developmental problems in children. Copper effects, increased effects from other contaminants. In other words, when you have nitrite and nitrate present in large amount of copper, it's going to increase that. Now, why are we concerned with nitrites and nitrates?
The blue babies.
Ah, blue baby syndrome. What's the blue baby syndrome?
Well, there's a bubble, blah, 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 blah.
That big word, exactly. Which means what in a nutshell?
It interferes with it.
Right, when you have lots of nitrites, nitrates in the water source, our bodies prefer that over oxygen. And in order for our bodies to operate the red blood cells, oxygen is required. If there are nitrites, nitrates present, your body will take in that before the oxygen and essentially lead to suffocation. And that's why we call it the blue baby, because it literally suffocates these young children. Usually you're looking at infants under the age of 6 months that are more susceptible to this. And that's one of the reasons why, we stress, do not allow your babies to drink the drinking water. Where do these nitrates and nitrites come from? How do they get into our drinking water source?
Agricultural practices.
Absolutely. There's no catch basin up under there when we irrigate our crops in order to get the big, beautiful crops before we can capture that before it goes into our groundwater sources or runoff from your surface from the agricultural episodes there. So again, that can lead to blue baby. And when you have copper plus those entities, that increases the effect of the nitrite and nitrate.
So the copper by itself is like all that, because we still use copper piping there.
Right, and there are still some health effects from copper, such as gastroenteritis and things like that, when you have over the maximum contaminant level that's there, which is a 1.3. And the way I look at any contaminant, if there's a huge MCL, anything over 1, then it's not going to be as serious on the health as if, let's say, for arsenic 0.01 milligrams per liter. That's a big difference. Smaller the MCL, the more potent that contaminant is as far as health concern. So the purpose of the lead and copper rule was to minimize the exposure to these contaminants, as well as to minimize the effect from drinking water. 1991, we see the promulgation of the maximum contaminant level goals. Now the goals are a little different from, good morning, how are you all? Are you all here for the EPA drinking water?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Wow, they're late.
Yeah, no, we only gave her part of this stuff.
I'm pretty sure they have a real good reasons. Pastor God, can I get one of you all to sit up here?
They probably ran into the same person on the highway.
That's right.
Okay, traffic was real bad, huh? And I'll get you all situated with the registration component a little later. Right now, we're in Module 4, which is on page 4-3. So we have the rules, the maximum contaminant level goals going in place in 1991. And again, those goals are just the number which no health effects are recognized. The limits are the numbers that are in place where we start seeing the adverse health effects. And so we try to set, or EPA tries to set the maximum contaminant levels or limits as close to the goal as possible. Now, the maximum contaminant level for lead is 0. You don't want any of it in there. For copper, we'll see that it is the 1.3, which is the limit also. There were minor revisions to the rules that were implemented in 2007. And again, the goal provides a maximum health protection from lead and copper. The lead and copper rule was put into place for community water system as well as non-community water system. Who can tell me the difference between the two, or what are the stipulation or requirements for a community water system? What does EPA define a community water system as? Yes, sir.
Defines a community water system as any water system that serves more than 25 people, more than 60 days out of the year, same people.
Okay, and that is a public water system, very good, under which the community resides. So we have the minimum 15 service connection, minimum or 25 individual. With the community system, we're looking at a year-round basis. It's only different. So it falls up under that umbrella. What about a non-community or non-transient non-community? We refer to them as. Still, yes?
It'd be the same, 25 people, more than 6 months out of the year, same 25 people, 6 months out of the year.
Excellent, absolutely. And so examples of a non-transient, non-community water system would be?
Less than 25 and less than 6 months.
Your schools,
Well,
your
schools,
daycare.
daycares, factories, right, and there's another one that would be your transient, those would be like the hotels, motels, where you have people going.
Yeah, because some of those systems actually have, their own water supply, so.
Absolutely.
They have a well there, and then out of state, there's lots of trailer parks
And they have to
schools even.
maintain those.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, if it's like a mobile home park, then it would be considered a community system. But if it's an RV place, then it would be considered transient. Absolutely. Super. All right, so health effects of lead and copper. Shane was asking whether or not copper by itself pose any issues. Again, we talked about for infants and young children, blue baby syndrome, and magnification of the nitrite ingestion, as well as gastrointestinal effects can be anywhere from a mild stomachache to diarrhea, vomiting, and things like that. We see the same effect with adults as far as overexposure to excessive amounts of copper. And yes, there are copper pipes that are still out there. That's the reason why we still do the lead and copper sampling, to make sure we're up under that level. Some of the effects of lead: low birth weight, slows down the physical and mental development. And as you all recall, years ago, lead was in paint. And we start seeing and try to minimize the kids' ingestion of the paint chips and things like that. Also, we see damaged hearing, reduced attention span. You hear so much about that nowadays, and so many people are medicated because of that. Poor classroom performance, all of those can be attributed to excessive amounts of lead, overexposure to lead. As far as in adults, kidney damage, increased blood pressure. Now that was very interesting to me. How many people do you know that are taking some type of a blood pressure medication? And so they trace even that can be attributed to overexposure of lead. Damage to reproductive systems. So these are some of the ill health effects that we see when people are exposed to too many of these contaminants, as far as lead and copper. Now every report, so we're going to do the monitoring, and every report must include short informational statements such as infants and young children are typically more vulnerable to lead in drinking water than the general population. So definitely, we're the champions of the environment, and we need to protect them. Elevated lead can cause serious health problems, and so this wording here must go into when you have an exceedance and you're doing the reporting and public notification, you have to make sure that you're using EPA language. In certain circumstances, the primacy agency, which would be your state agency, can tweak the wording or allow you to change the wording somewhat, but for the most part, you gotta have wording very similar to this. And the other thing is that lead in drinking water is primarily from materials and components associated with service lines and home plumbing. A lot of time it's not your system. So what do you do when it's not your system and it is the homeowner's problem? Well, there's components in the rule to address that. All right, now some of the informational statement, and also to help the customer to react to it, you want to educate them. Simply tell them allow your water to run before using it, looking at 30 seconds to 2 minutes. A rule of thumb is wait till there's a temperature change, because what's happening, the lead and copper is leaching into the water because of stagnant water. When the water is left motionless 6 hours or more, that's when you have this possibility of leaching into the water. So if you run your water till you get that temperature change, now we know what? We're getting water directly from our main source. And so there should be a reduction of the amount of lead and copper that's there. We also want to let our customer know if they are still concerned about the levels of lead and copper, have your water tested. And you need to also provide them areas where they can go, or suggestions where they can go to have their water tested. And for more information, of course, you can always refer back to the Safe Drinking Water Hotline. The other thing is there may be a possibility that your particular house or home has a higher content than others in your neighborhood. Again, it goes back to what's in your home plumbing. Now, as I said earlier, a system may write its own educational statement, but it has to be in consultation with the state primacy agent. See, okay? So, sampling. How many of you all have gone through the sampling episode for lead and copper? Everybody's hands should go up because we've been doing this for how many years now? Yeah. And it's amazing because I was in a place last week where there were some people that were not doing it. So it's like, okay, birding has not gotten around yet. But we've been doing it for some while, and hopefully we're on the reduced monitoring. But some of the specific instruction for sampling and testing, we need to make sure that we've selected sample points, and these sample points are site-specific, turned into the state. We're going to deal with collection of sample, analyzing them, and gathering the data for the sample. Now, how do we determine the number of samples to collect? It's going to be based on population or the system size. Okay. That will dictate how many samples you're collecting. If you look on page, you have a chart there, page 4-6. They'll give you some information as far as the size and the number of sites that you need. And since this is a small water system grant, that's the one that we're dealing with for small systems, anywhere from 5, let's do the less than 101 population, we need 5 sites. Okay? And for water quality parameter tap sample sites, it needs 1. So 5 for lead and copper, 1 for your water quality parameters. If you have a population from 101 to 500, you need 10 sampling sites for lead and copper, and at least one water quality parameter of sites. And what do I mean by water quality? Where we're looking at pH, conductivity, all those other parameters that goes along, alkalinity, orthophosphate. All of those parameters we're going to test also. For your systems from 501 to 3300, and really the cap on small systems is the 3300, 20 lead and copper sampling sites, and at least 2 water quality sites there. Now, after you've done the initial monitoring and everything comes back hanky-dory, then you can breathe, because usually you're allowed to go to a reduced monitoring. For reduced monitoring, you can see that the sites are pretty much cut in half for the most part for lead and copper. Taps from 20 to 10, from 10 to 5. Less than 101, you're still stuck with the same 5, because it says you gotta have a minimum of 5 in the rules. Okay? All right, let's look at the short-term revisions to the lead and copper rule. Where are we going to pull these samples from? What constitute an approved sample site? Can I go to the outside little faucet, collect from out there, outside the house? Where do we typically? Huh?
Somewhere that's used for human
Consumption. Very good, Shane, very good. So usually you're looking at a kitchen or bathroom tap. Hot or cold?
Cold.
Cold. Very good. Excellent, excellent. System with fewer than 5 taps must sample all taps at least once. Take repeat samples on different days until you get a total of 5 samples. The primacy agency, again, has discretion to allow systems with less than 5 taps to collect 1 sample from each tap that can be used for human consumption. Because we want to see how much of this is leaching out and affecting the population. Systems with less than 5 samples are required to use the highest test result as the 90th percentile level. And also, another short-term revision, it allows a reduction to lead and copper sampling frequency to 1 per year, but it requires the system to make sure they're collecting at least 1 sample per tap that can be used for human consumption. You can also have a further reduction of once every 3 years. EPA will allow the system to collect fewer than 5 samples, but again, you gotta go to each tap that there is human consumption. All right. Types of sampling sites. Sites must be approved in writing by the primacy agency. Okay. So you got to be very specific, site-specific, where you're getting them from. All right, the different types of sites. We have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. What's the difference between the sampling sites? Tier 1, we have single-family structures containing copper pipes, lead and solder installed after 1982. Or it can be served by lead service line. That would be Tier 1. Tier 2 is your multi-family buildings and things like that. But still, we're looking at after 1982. And Tier 3, single-family structures that contain the copper pipes, lead and solder installed prior to 1983. So we have 1, 2, and 3, Tier 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the single-family prior, after 82. Tier 2, multi-family structures after 1982 with the copper and lead. And Tier 3 will be single families prior to 1983.
What happened in 1982?
What happened in 1982?
What's the significance of that?
The significance there is the changing of guards as far as the materials that were used. When we start seeing, hey, this is affecting people, so now we're going to reduce the amount of lead and copper that it is. We went to the polyethylene type tubing, plastic piping, as opposed to just using straight copper and things like that. So that's a significant question. And I should repeat, you all, if I forget, ask me to repeat the questions just to make sure that I have a mic and you don't, that they hear it there. Excellent question. All right, your non-transient, non-community system should only use tier 1 or tier 3 for their sample site selection. Tier 1 or tier 3. And both tier 1 and tier 3 deals with single family residents. Okay, not multi-building. All right, 50% of the samples collected during each monitoring period from sites that contain lead pipes or copper pipes. 50% should be from those that are served by a lead service line. That's the other stipulation where you're going to get your samples from. All right, when collecting sample, make sure you go back to the Code of Federal Regulations for their proper technique for collection, 141.86. You want to make sure that if you're utilizing customers, there are some entities, you don't go into the customer's house, and so you plead with the customers, please pull this sample, give them the 1 liter bottles. If you're doing that, it's sort of like you're giving your Coke away. And what do I mean by that? Let's say something comes back hokey with that sample. If you've allowed the customer to pull the sample, you cannot use that as a premise for, okay, I need to resample, but this sample, the integrity of the sample is not what it should be. So note that when, and most utilities, they allow the customers to pull the sample. But give them instructions, walk them through what you want them to do. In other words, we want you to pull first draw, don't allow it to run or anything like that. First draw sample, make sure that the water has been in the lines for at least a minimum of 6 hours, not more than 18. Collect from the cold water kitchen tap or bathroom sink. Now, one of the things that EPA says, because again, there is some preservation with acid in this sample bottle, that we can delay that in order to protect the public so they don't have to be acidified. You have up to 14 days to acidify after that, so the public is still protected. But systems may not challenge result if residents are allowed to pull samples. Now, do you all have your residents pulling the samples for the most part?
Yeah.
And that's the way that it's typically done.
Yeah, we usually give pretty detailed instructions and ask them to sign, if they will, that they take the sample the way we've asked them to in the instructions, and everybody's always been, most people are very compliant with that, and we make sure that one of the things that we do too is we send them the results.
Okay, excellent. That's another thing that's stipulated and specified, that at least you give those results back to the consumer, which have aided there.
The sampling first thing in the morning, because usually everyone's getting up and the water hasn't been used. We usually suggest that when you come home from work, if no one's been home, there's your 6 to 8 hours. So.
Excellent.
And you usually do more than the minimum number.
Yes.
You do, as I recall, so.
You always
got
get
a
a few
bigger
extra.
sample,
Okay. All right. Now, if you're collecting samples from the lead service line, now we want to make sure flushing takes place. So collect a tap after flushing the volume of water between the tap and the lead service line. You can tap directly into that lead service line to pull your sample. And if you're dealing with single-family residents, again, you're going to instruct them, allow the water to run until there is a change in temperature prior to collecting that sample. So we can make sure we have a representative sample. Okay. For your small or medium system exceeding the action level, they must monitor the following at the taps and entry points to the distribution system. These are those water quality parameters that we mentioned. For your small systems under 100, you got to have at least one sample site. We're doing pH, alkalinity, orthophosphate, or silica if you're using those type of inhibitors in your system, calcium conductivity, as well as water temperature. Yes. Please help yourselves. Coffee should be warm now. It's not cold enough for it to be frozen, and donuts. All right, to qualify for reduced sampling, you need to be below the action level for the previous 2 6 months period, and then you will qualify for reduction. And you must include the parameters on the previous slide. In other words, the pH, alkalinity, orbital phosphate, silica, applicable, calcium, conductivity, and temperature. You must have completed those. Now, these are your monitoring period. For lead and copper samples, you have this table in your book also. For the initial monitoring period, we're looking at all those parameters that we just recently mentioned, and the location should be taps and at the entry points to the distribution system, and we're going to do it for every 6 months. If we have a hit or a hot spot, you're going to increase that monitoring frequency also. And I think I have a quick reference guide to kind of lay that out in a minute here. After installation of corrosion control, we're still looking at pH, alkalinity, orbital phosphate, or silica. If applicable, we're going to do those at the chaps, and we're going to continue with every 6 months. We're also going to do pH, alkalinity, dosage rate, concentration, inhibitor dose rate, inhibitor residual to every entry point to the distribution system, and this should be completed no less frequently than every 2 weeks that you're going to do that. If you have if the state specifies parameter values for optimum corrosion control, we're still doing those analyses at those points, again, every 6 months, or no less than every 2 weeks. Those are the stipulations there. So, can any laboratory perform the lead and copper testing according to EPA? No. They have to be certified labs. As far as the pH, conductivity, temperature, orbital phosphate, all of those, you can just about utilize any laboratory for those testing parameters here. Lead and copper has to be a certified laboratory to perform these analyses here. You want to make sure whatever lab you're using that they're utilizing approved methods because it is for reporting, and that's one of the stipulations both the EPA as well as your state agency really, really stress. It must be an approved method in order to report the numbers. Okay. Reporting requirements. And I think Rebecca got this one right. After we get those results back, report is due within the first 10 days following the end of each applicable monitoring period. So that's either every 6 months, annually, every 3 years, or 9 years. That'll do within the first 10 days there. The 90th percentile lead and copper concentration measured from among all lead and copper water tap samples are submitted. Results of the sample collected at your entry points to the distribution, as well as all water quality parameters during the 6-month monitoring period. Again, water quality parameters, the pH, conductivity, temperature, those parameters there. All of that's required. Now, if I have a new source, I need to, or a new site, I need to make sure I contact the state agency for approval prior to making those changes. If I'm changing my treatment, in other words, if I'm changing my dosing technique, the amount, I need to, and it's the existing chemicals that I'm using, I need to notify the state for approval for that. If I'm making modification, any type of modification to the treatment scheme, changing chemicals and all of that, must have that stamp of approval from your promising agency. So switching secondary disinfectant, coagulant, corrosion inhibitor products, all of that, you need to make sure that you're in direct line of communication with your state agency. We're also going to do source water monitoring reporting, and again, all of those parameters are also due within 10 days following the monitoring period. Failure to collect from specified sites must be accompanied with an explanation why the sample point changed. So before you do that, check their pulse and make sure you get their approval. So, if I have a problem and I have to implement corrosion control treatment, again, I gotta have all the pertinent information in order to report. So whatever recommendation for optimizing corrosion control, I have to demonstrate what I am doing in the optimization of that. If they say you have to do a study to evaluate the effectiveness, document, document, document. If it's not written, it wasn't done. So you want to make sure that you can track the effectiveness. This is what I had day one. This is a corrosion control treatment I put into place. This is what I'm getting now to show that yes, I am working to rid myself. It's not my problem of the issue. And we have to follow up with a letter certifying that the system has completed installing whatever treatment for corrosion control if necessary. Okay. Recommendation regarding source water treatment is also a part of that report, and again, certification letter that we've done what the state has asked us to do, and all of this must be well documented and submitted to the state within a 24-month period. Any questions? All right, continuation. Lead service line reporting, replacement reporting. Now, what happened if you had hot spots? One of the things was that the EPA says that you need to start scheduling replacing, if it's that problem, replacing some of the lines, and the stipulation was to shoot for at least a 7% on an annual basis as far as replacement. All of that must be documented and reported that you're doing that, and certified with the letter. So system exceeding the action level of lead no later than 12 months after the end of the monitoring period to demonstrate in writing to the state that it's conducted the material evaluation. Identify the initial number of lead service line. Once you identify, get to work. Start replacement of those. You should schedule at least to replace at least 7% of the initial number of lead service line on an annual basis. In addition, conduct sampling that demonstrates that lead concentration in all your service line is equal to or less than the 0.015, which is what? The MCL or the MCLG? MCL, very good. What was the goal for lead? 0. Continuation of the reporting requirements as far as public education. You need to make sure that you're making a good faith effort to get the information out to your clients and customers that we have elevated lead in the line. So you want to provide that information to your newspapers, radio stations, television stations, and facility notices in places that are frequented by women and children. Okay, get the information out. Extra samples must be reported. I heard earlier, I think, if I heard correct, that Rebecca was saying that you all pull extra samples just to make sure everything was sometime. Just keep in mind, if they are collected in an approved method, you got to report whatever results you get. Okay. And as far as record keeping, records must be retained for no later than how many years? 12 years. 12 years. Okay. So let's look at the lead action level, that should be a 0.015. there, that's a misprint there. 0.015 is for lead, okay? Copper is 1.3 milligrams per year. It should be zero.
It's correct in the book.
Yes, it should be. What page is it on the book? Look on page.
421.
Okay, 421, also 4-18. So either one of those 0.015 is the correct level, contaminant level. And copper 1.3. 1.3 is both the goal as well as the limit for copper. Now, why were we concerned with copper?
It's bad for you.
It's bad for why?
The blue baby thing.
Good, it intensifies.
There was a whole list of stuff, yeah.
Very good, it intensifies the nitrates concentration, which leads to.
Your body absorbs that quicker than it absorbs the oxygen.
Excellent,
Therefore, you
excellent,
suffocate that.
excellent. And
You're gonna behave.
there you go, if I had my froggy, I'll throw it to you. Excellent. And again, your young children, babies under the 6 months are more susceptible to it. Now, as far as water quality parameters, and from time to time, out of the blue, I'll just ask you a question that we've covered, just to make sure that we're all still awake. Your water quality parameters monitoring, we're going to collect samples at taps every 6 months. Entry point collection 6 months prior to corrosion control treatment, and then 2 weeks thereafter. If we're on the reduced monitoring or sampling situation, again, we can only get there if we show that we're meeting our limits for at least 6 consecutive months monitoring period, if monitoring annually. Reduced sampling and parameters are meant for 3 annual monitoring periods if you're doing the once or triannually, once every 3 years. Those are the parameters, you've seen those before: pH, alkaline, potassium, conductivity, orthophosphate, silica, applicable, as well as temperature. So, we have an exceedance. What do we do now? How do we rectify? How do we mitigate it? We started looking at some corrosion control treatment processes. Again, your CCTs must be completed by large systems. EPA says your small and medium systems only are required if required by the state. And again, they give you 18 months to complete the study. Okay. So you go back to your promising agency as for direction for smaller systems. Systems then have 24 months to install, must perform 2 consecutive 6-month monitoring of your TAP and your WQVs. Small systems may stop the corrosion control treatment if less than or equal to reaction level for 2 consecutive monitoring periods. So they give you that option. You also need to do source water monitoring. Again, you want to make sure that you're meeting or you're below that action level. Source water monitoring when you exceed it is a must. 1 set of samples for every entry point to the distribution system is required within 6 months of your first exceedance. Systems have 24 months to implement any required source water treatment. Groundwater systems, you need to monitor it every 3 years, surface water at least annually. And then again, they give you that option or that out. If everything comes back great, not a problem, then we can look at, once you put in the request, reduce monitoring. Okay, public education and supplemental monitoring, as well as content of written public education material monitoring notification is what we're going to cover next in public education. As far as public education, we want to notify them, yes, there was an exceedance, but in addition to that, what are the health effects? Okay, what can you expect if you are exposed to lead? Sources of lead. how's it getting into your drinking water, where the source is coming from. Also, as you said earlier, talk to your customers, or again, it can be in written form, let them know where they can get their water tested. And again, we're making a good faith effort to get this information out there. Okay. And if you use a customer home as your collection point, you will make sure that you give them the results once you get it. We talked about the lead service line replacement, at least 70% annually. You must notify your customers at least 45 days prior to replacement, because there may be an increase in lead levels while you're undergoing that construction. Collect samples 72 hours of the replacement and then provide results within 3 days of the receipt. Compliance options, perform corrosion study. And again, if you're looking at what are my alternatives, could be sequestering, adding anthro, phosphate, silica-based chemicals, probably one of the easiest options to implement for corrosion control. You can add alkalinity chemicals, alkalinity-based chemicals like lime, soda ash, caustic soda. And what it does, it stabilizes the water. Corrosion will happen when the pH does what? Takes a dive, yeah. So these things right here raise the pH up. So you want to make sure you're performing the calculation of the stability index. There are a lot of different things that are out there. Bayes curve is probably the easiest. Calcium carbonate. There's a Langler's test that you can also utilize. So you want to make sure you have everything at hand that you need in order to check the stability of your water, especially when you start adding chemicals there. Treatments must be what? Approved by the state regulatory agency. Again, you want to utilize them. That's what they are there for. Oh, the more I think, the more confused I get. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
The action level, is that still, I can't remember if you mentioned that earlier, was that the 90th percentile of all the samples is still the action level now?
Yes, yes.
So in other words, you get 10 samples, or, right, 9 of them have to be below
Right.
the action. That's right.
0.015 for lead and 1 point.
If 10 is 0.015, and 9 is 0.010, then you're okay.
You're okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's exactly what that means. Good question.
It's not just one sample, it's all.
Yeah, you're looking at that 90.
How many cities, it's older cities that have the major problem with lead services, isn't it?
Typically, that's what we saw initially during the initial monitoring episode. Because again, you look at the home plumbing, and we're in most of the older homes and things like that. And so you probably had more hits.
Like Philadelphia, Washington, they're older cities, yeah.
And I cannot comment,
Yeah.
maybe some of you all, because I'm not from this area. My world is Texas, and so I'm looking in Texas at the older homes, but I'm pretty sure it's the same scenario no matter where you are.
Yeah, the really older homes do have that. We don't have.
You all didn't have a problem with it?
No.
Okay.
Well, some systems do, but typically it's a monitoring that when they do their testing, they either don't do it on time
Oh, right, yeah.
or they
They don't do enough. or-
don't do enough. or
Right, and that's when you
that
get
kind of
into
stuff.
trouble with the state agencies. Yeah, failure to do it. But any additional questions or comments on this module? Feel pretty good about the lead and copper rule? Excellent.